Welcome to this episode of Artist Tales, the podcast that features and celebrates artists from different walks of life. I'm Heather Martin, and I'm speaking with Stephanie Ellyne, who's an American actress, singer, and voiceover artist living in London. I met Stephanie through a mutual friend. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Heather.
It's really good to have you.
Thanks. It's especially nice because we tried this about a month ago when I was staying with a friend in Ireland, and I don't think the internet connection was very good. So I've had time to think about what I wanted to say a little bit more.
Oh, good. The internet connection is much better now. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into, your acting and singing and the voiceover career.
So I was born in New Orleans and my family moved to California. And I think lots of kids everywhere, but certainly American kids, I grew up kind of watching loads and loads of television. And so it seemed like the most exciting thing you could do would be to grow up being on television. Typical California childhood. And it's funny because one of the recurring voice jobs I do is for this famous serial called Dark Shadows, which ran in the States for, I think it was over a decade. And it's about vampires, witches, the occult, all this sort of thing. And when I was a kid, I would watch this on TV and I loved it. And there was this glamorous witch named Angelique. And I'd say to my mom, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be in Dark Shadows." And then decades and decades and decades go by. And I'm living here in London and I'm doing audiobook recording for the RNIB, that's Royal National Institute for Blind People. It's a charity. And they have audiobook section, talking books. And a producer I worked with there, David Darlington, he also works on this amazing, an audio serial of Dark Shadows using the original cast from 30 years before, some of whom are still alive. And the idea was to have some actors in London, American actors in London, reading their bits, and then the original cast in LA reading their lines. So I could be doing a scene with someone who's actually in LA, but in the London studio, the producer reads those lines and they're all married up later, right? So they needed that. There was one actress they couldn't seem to locate who played this character called Amy Jennings. And this was a child part in the soap opera. So they had me just come in for a day to do a placer voice, just read the lines. But when they found the actress who actually did it, back in the 70s, she would do it. But then in the end, I did end up doing it. And I had some scenes with the character of Angelique, this witch, this famous actress. And I just assumed that it wouldn't be that real actress, it would be someone else. But it actually was Lara Parker, who played the original Angelique that I'd watched on television when I was a little girl. And I was doing scenes with her, but I was only doing scenes with her when they married the recordings, the LA recordings and the London recordings. But a lot of weird things like that happen, I think, in the acting world. The audio part of it is the part I'm mostly involved in. So, I guess I was always interested in it. And I went to acting school. And then I came to London. I was traveling around the world and I just stayed for a while. And I love to sing and I'd done lots of musicals in the US. So I tried out for this band in London because, London, that amazing music capital. And I actually got into the band and the band never made it. It was that era where everyone was trying to get a record deal. And unfortunately, we never did get a record deal. But by then I loved London and I wanted to stay. So I gave up acting for a while. I was trying to do music, did other things. And then I just sort of went back to it late. I went to drama school again here as a mature student because it's best if you go to drama school in London and get an agent if you're not already established. And I did lots of amazing theater jobs. My favorite one it was mostly a touring production. It was by the actor Nadim Sawalha, and he wrote this play about the writer Khalil Gibran. And I played Mary Haskell, who was sort of a muse to Khalil Gibran. She was a very influential woman in his life, and they would be engaged and then that wouldn't work out. But she was always in his life, inspiring him and convincing him to write in English, to write The Prophet. And we traveled to so many places. We went to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, and I was involved with it from 2011 to 2016. And sort of in the middle of that, I started doing audiobooks for the RNIB. And eventually I moved into commercial audiobooks because I recorded this fantastic 1,200-page book called Duck's Nuba Report by the writer Lucy Ellman. And the book was up for the Booker Prize in 2019, and it won the Goldsmiths Prize. And so most audiobooks, like if you ever listen to audiobooks on Audible, they can range from anywhere from 2 hours to like maybe 20 hours. But this audiobook was, I think I'm right here, 46 hours long. Yeah, that was amazing. But the RNAB is a charity, so we'd record these books and we'd never actually get to even listen to them back, the actors, because part of the deal with the charity is they're just for visually impaired people who are part of the Talking Books Library. But Lucy Ellman came to the studio one day and we met, and then she recommended to her publisher that, because she liked the recordings, that they see if they could actually purchase the recordings, and then that would become the commercial audiobook. And I didn't even know that was possible, but yes, that happened. And so that opened up the door to me doing the kind of audiobooks you can buy and you can send to your friends. And because I was always telling my mom back in the US that I was doing these audiobooks, and she's like, oh, well, why don't you send me some? Oh, well, I can't, Mom, because you can't actually buy them. It all sounded very bogus, I'm sure. But yeah, now I'm sending her 46-hour audiobooks. So she has lots of time to see that I really am doing that for a living.
And what's the difference that you find between doing an audiobook versus stage or theater, and other types of work that you do?
Yeah, that is interesting. So one thing is when you do theater, you get a lot of your energy, both from the people that you're on stage with, the other actors, but also a great deal from the audience. And when I really realized that was the case is I did a one-woman show called Peace Mom about a real woman, Cindy Sheehan, whose son was killed through friendly fire in the Gulf War. And so I was on stage for an hour, just me. And there was, you had to relate to the audience. She was talking to the audience. And it was amazing. Like if there was only one person in the house watching, I think that actually did happen one night. It was a very small house this one night, one or two people. And so they often feel quite terrified because the actor's sending all this energy, like you're throwing a beach ball back and forth. You're sending all this energy out there. And if it's, a fair number of people, the responsibility for giving the energy back to the performer, it's divided among how many people are in the house. But if they're all by themselves, they get really self-conscious. But I never actually understood just how much energy you get from the audience, because a lot of plays, it's as though they're not there, they're meant to be eavesdropping, but you still do feel that energy. So the thing about doing audio work is it's so intimate because there's just you and a producer in the room. And actually, I self-recorded 4 audiobooks from spring 2020 because of the pandemic. Audiobook companies were looking for actors who had their own recording studio and would do the recording and most of the editing themselves. So then it really was just you in the room. So it feels so personal. You don't really have any sense of an audience. And yet it's the thing that potentially you might be reaching the most people, but generally they're all listening by themselves in a car or while they're washing up, or they have their earphones in. So you're alone when you do it, or maybe one other person, and they're probably alone when they listen. But potentially there could be thousands and thousands of them.
And how about the radio work? Is that vastly different from doing, the voiceovers or the book? The book reading that you're doing, because obviously they're kind of editing, you're potentially not hearing what the other person's saying that might be read to you by somebody else. So they're kind of editing it depending on sort of as and when they get the different parts done.
I think everything I've done with audio, it hasn't been live. So you're always aware, like this, that if anything goes wrong, it can be edited. So My experience of radio and audiobooks is it's pretty much the same in that, you can go back if something goes wrong. So in that sense, I suppose live theater feels a bit more risky.
But is there a certain, you have touched on it, but it kind of sounds like there's a certain spontaneity to it. So even if you get it wrong, that you can almost turn that into part of the actual experience, can't you?
Yes, I think so.
Not that you get things wrong, but
No, I do know what you mean. One thing I did find very interesting about something that came because of the pandemic. I mean, I'm not very technically minded, so I know that there are lots of voice actors that have their own studio and always have, but I wouldn't even consider such a thing because I'm not. I'm a little bit frightened of technology. I'm sort of a late adopter, shall we say. But since no one was having open studios, to protect each other, they really did need to find actors who could set up their own studio. So with a lot of help from a friend, I now, have my own little recording studio, and I, with great, great difficulty, learned how to use recording software. But then I found, because if you're working with a producer, like people always ask me, oh, do they direct you and do they say what they think of your interpretation? In my experience, no. I mean, they're on the clock. They need to get through a certain amount of pages per day, let's say, if you're doing it. So they're following the text very closely, but it's to make sure that not a single word is left out. That's part of it. It has to be absolutely accurate. You can't add anything or mispronounce anything. So they're editing as they go, the producers. If you get something wrong, they tell you then and there. But as long as the words are all right, they just let you do your thing. And so that does feel very improvisational in a way. Obviously, you're working with a text, but in terms of your interpretation, you don't have time because you're given the book. If you're lucky, you get the chance to read the book before you start, but let's say you're going to do 50 pages the next day. So sometimes you're just reading that 50 pages ahead, working out different characterizations if there's lots of different people in the book. But you don't have time, like when you rehearse a play, you rehearse over and over and over. There's no time to do that. There really isn't enough time to rehearse a 200 or in Ducks Newburyport, over 1,000-page book, how you're going to do things. So if you're working with a producer, it kind of comes out as it comes out pretty much. So it is indeed very spontaneous. But then when I was recording myself, I spent such a long time because since I could control it, right? Since I could go back and take more time, I was doing that. So I do a scene and I think, I don't know. I think I want to try a different approach. And I keep going over and over and over it. So it took much, much longer to record myself than it would for anyone else to record me because I had the luxury of going over things and planning what I was going to do. So that was wonderful to have the chance to really get what you wanted to do exactly as though you were rehearsing a play or doing many takes of a scene in a film. But it's not very cost effective in terms of how much time you're doing to get through the few pages, let's say. But with Ducks Newburyport, I mean, again, that was recorded at the RNIB, and I did have a producer. And thank God, because if I'd had to record that long a book by myself, I'd still be working on it now. And I started working on that in 2019. And so in that case, it went back to the sort of improvisational thing. And it's a stream of consciousness following the thoughts of a woman, a mother of 4, who runs a home bakery. She used to be a teacher, quite an extraordinary person. And it's following her thoughts through many, many, many days. And it was such a long book that even much less than normal, would have any sense of how to act it out. So I was following the stream of consciousness. And in a way, sometimes your thoughts do surprise you, don't they? I mean, you don't plan what you're going to think. You might try, but it doesn't really work very well. It just happens. And I think later you interpret it. Like we plan what we're going to say, but thoughts think themselves in so many ways. And that's what it was like reading that book. It was like as the words came out of my mouth from what I was reading. I mean, I didn't have time to read the whole 1,200 pages before we started. I got it very shortly before we started recording. So that really was an improvisational experience, yeah.
Doing a book that long, the challenge of it is almost you don't have time to prep for it. Or is that kind of something you use to your advantage?
I actually did have to do a lot of prep, but the prep was, it's such an interesting book. So the woman, I say the woman because you never do actually find out what her name is, because she herself is thinking the thoughts, and you don't tend to remind yourself of your name when you when you think. She would often, in her thoughts, start thinking about particularly history. I mean, she was a history teacher, and she's living in Ohio, which is not a state that she's native of, but she ended up somehow having to teach the history of Ohio. And a lot of that was about battles with the American Indian population and lots of horrible massacres and things. And there were also lots of lists and recitations of place names and names of rivers and things like that. So when you're writing those things, you don't have to know how to pronounce them necessarily if you're copying them out of an atlas, or, the name of tribes or the name of American Indian words that we wouldn't know how to pronounce those. And if you write them down, you're just writing down what you've learned. But if you have to say it, you really do have to try to get it right. So I kept listening to videos. The best thing to do would be find a video that was made by people that were part of that tribe talking about historical battles, because then they would obviously pronounce it correctly. And with towns, it was like, if people looked up those towns, she often wouldn't say that, but it would turn out a lot of the towns were places where there'd been mass shootings, like school shootings. And so if I looked up the name of this small town, sometimes I'd get because I was looking up videos to try to find people actually pronouncing the names. And there would be these newscasters in Washington, D.C. talking about a school shooting that happened there. But of course, they may not know how to pronounce the name of that town either, because it's obscure. So the best thing was to find videos of hunters, or a video made by the town council about their town, right? So I spent hours every night, like if I'm recording every day, then so I'd go home at night and I'd start looking up, okay, these are the towns I have to say tomorrow. These are the Indian tribes I have to pronounce. So a lot of it was all that. So there especially wasn't time to then interpret how I would say this part or how I would say that part. It just kind of came as it came, just like the woman's thoughts did. So maybe that worked to its advantage.
And just going back to your singing, I mean, have you been able to weave any of that into, other aspects, whether it's your stage work or, your voiceovers? Are you able to weave that in, or is it very distinct? Are, sort of the different strands of what you do very distinct from each other?
I see what you mean. One reason I love doing audiobooks is often that does seem to come into it. So Lucy Ellman in Ducks Newburyport, often the woman, as she did her baking, you could tell by what she was thinking about, that as she was baking, she would often be watching classic old movies at the same time and lots of musicals. And so in the midst of something else, a grocery list or reflecting upon some horrible crime or something, there'd just be little snatches of songs from these golden age of Hollywood musicals, right? And when I was preparing, I thought, oh yeah, okay. And there were so many of them. I thought, right, so I'm going to I just type in the lyrics through search engine, and then I'd find, and often they weren't well-known songs. And then I would learn to sing it, because I was like, great, my singing can come in handy here. But then the first time I started singing one of the bits in the RNIB studio, they called the head of it, because they have a copyright rule there that just for safety, you're not supposed to sing anything for books, the RNIB talking books. So I didn't really get a chance to. But then when I started working with commercial audiobooks, right? So I was recording these myself, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for it. I will sing when there'll be songs and things. I'll sing a bit of the song that's printed, and they can come back to me, because you are working with a producer remotely that will come back to you to tell you if anything's wrong that you need to do retakes of. But yeah, in the commercial world, they seem to know exactly how much you can get away with and be willing to take any risks about it. So yes, and then I've recorded Lucy Ellman's next book, which is a book of essays called Things Are Against Us. And again, in that, there were loads of little songs, but this time, this was an audiobook that was being done by W.F. House, which is a huge audiobook company in the UK. And again, yeah, they left all the singing in, so that was great. So I got to use it. It's funny because another thing I do as well as audiobooks is I'm an artist's model. I work at art schools. So in audio work, yeah, there may be a little thumbnail photo of you or something, but they can't see you. So at home, especially if you're recording at home, it's very hard to get a completely soundproof space in a domestic setting. So many voice artists work at night, right? So you're doing all your main work between like 10 p.m. when the neighbors have probably quieted down and aren't sort of crashing and thumping over your head. And even planes flying overhead, they fly less at night, or not at all, maybe, depending on where you are. Less cars and trucks. So yeah, this is the time, right? So you're probably in your pajamas, looking in absolute fright, but it's fine because you're heard and not seen. And then this other strand, not so much during the pandemic because the art schools were closed. There was some Zoom modeling clothed. But yeah, normally I'd be in the art schools and there I was seen but not heard. So if you put them together, it was a perfect synthesis.
It's almost polar opposites to each other in some ways.
Yes, I know, exactly. But they fit, because if you add it all together, you're seen and heard.
Very true, very true. And what sort of influences have you had over your career?
I think in acting, I think this is true of so many actors, what you're really inspired by is a lot of wonderful performances you've seen in films or TV. And not so much as to model yourself on those people, but, some actors take such insane risks, They just really throw themselves into things in this really jaw-dropping way, and that can help you take risks yourself. And now that I'm doing audiobooks, I never had listened to an audiobook before I started recording them. And so really, it hasn't been that long before I've been listening to lots of audiobooks myself. But now I listen to them constantly. And it is interesting for me to listen to the different approaches of all the different narrators. And there's a couple narrators that I've become a total fangirl, and then literally sought out different things they recorded, even if I wouldn't necessarily be interested in the book, just to see what they do with them because of the amazing amount of energy they'll put into it. Or some people are just incredible at how much they vary their approach with all the different characters, which I can find really, really something I'd like to emulate. So yeah, I think that's my main inspiration for audio work is other narrators.
And how about some of the other work you do in terms of whether it's theater or singing? I mean, what sort of influences have you had there?
I think it really is the same thing about seeing lots of theater, listening to lots of different ways that songs are approached. And it just becomes part of this giant ocean of influence. And it's the spirit behind it. Do you know what I mean? That is so impressive because voices are so different that you could pick up a lot about the energy or spirit behind something in sound without ever sounding like that person because voices are so different.
And voices are very individual as well.
They are.
You've touched on COVID and the fact that you're doing a lot more audio book stuff and certainly doing your own editing of them. Apart from that, how have you found lockdown and COVID? Has it affected you in other ways?
Well, professionally, it actually opened up some very interesting new situations. I can't really see that otherwise I would have arranged to have my own recording studio. I'd been told that was a good thing to do, but I was like, that is not ever going to happen with me because I could never learn to do that and I don't want to. So it was necessity. I had to, and therefore I did. So that was quite good, actually. And then something I've really loved doing is I've been doing these Zoom performance salons. So there's this man, David Collard, quite an extraordinary figure, and he set up this art salon. The first one that he did was in real life, but then I think it was in February 2020, and then very quickly things shut down. So he moved it to Zoom on Friday and Saturday nights, and it was called Leap in the Dark. And then about 6 months later, he changed the name to Cart Horse Orchestra, which is cart horse and orchestra is the word anagrams. I got that wrong. Where you can mix up all the letters and it's the same word, anagram. Yeah. And so I was initially approached by him to perform from Ducks Newburyport. And so unlike this interview, it's, you're both being seen and heard. And he gets people from all over the world, different writers, artists, musicians, magicians, Zoom magic, has yoga, dress designers. It's fantastic. And after that initial reading of something I'd already worked on, Ducks Noob Report, he just kept asking me if I'd be willing to be the American voice for often dead writers, Susan Sontag, James Merrill, and all these writers, some of whom I hadn't actually heard of, Dasha Drindich. And I had the chance to work on so many different kinds of texts, and also with small publishers. There's this fantastic independent publishing house out of New Jersey called Sagging Meniscus Press, with just such adventurous, crazy writers. And I was asked to read a piece by one of those writers. And then I did some Zoom salons for Gallybeggar Press, which is the press that published Lucy Ellman, first with Ducks Noob Report and now with her book of essays, Things Are Against Us. And there were Zoom launches, whereas I suppose before all this, they would have been in real life. But because it's Zoom, wherever you are, you can participate. And I definitely think a lot of those opportunities of getting to read Lucy's things at the launch of these books, I don't know if that would have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. And certainly this event where I was working with writers in the US, in Europe, amazing. So it almost makes one feel guilty that professionally I've had such an amazing time because of it all, like new frontiers, although closed away. And I think a lot of people have actually found that.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways the pandemic has opened doors or opened opportunities that perhaps you and many others probably wouldn't have come across before.
Exactly.
Looking forward, I don't know how easy it is for you looking forward, what you think might be next. I mean, in some ways, who knows? Because a lot depends on, I guess, whether there's further lockdowns and how we, how we come out of this pandemic as and when we do, if we ever will, because I guess in a way it'll stay around us. But going forward, what sorts of projects do you foresee in the future for you?
Well, I think, again, partly because of the pandemic, because people had time on their hands, and so they were really watching lots of box sets and listening to lots of audiobooks, either maybe for the first time or certainly much more than they ever had before. So the whole audiobook market has just exploded. So, I mean, I suppose one aspect of that is a lot of people are now, actors are getting into it where maybe they wouldn't have before. But of course, there is a lot more work being done as well. So I feel quite hopeful about that. And I really do love doing them. I do hope to get back into a professional studio as well as doing self-recording, because it takes so much time to self-record. Because first of all, with me, and I think a lot of actors, you keep doing it over and over and over until you get what you want. That takes a lot of time. But also you're doing the editing, a lot of the editing, cutting out bits and putting bits together. Whereas in a studio, the producer does all that. So you end up getting much more work done per hour if they do that work. So yeah, I do look forward to that. Yeah, it's funny because one of the things about performing is it's so hard to predict what's going to happen. It really is. I mean, auditions, sometimes you'll only find out about 2 days before they want to see a self-tape audition. You'll find out like the night before and self-tape auditions happened even before the pandemic. They don't tend to hire rooms anymore to see actors in real life. You just have to make your own self-tape, which is, again, asking actors to be technicians, their own cameraman, their own film producer and stuff like that. But you'll usually get very little time to prepare those. And then you usually don't get that long lead in about after the audition as to when you'd actually start doing it. It's all very quick, so you can't plan ahead for the future that much. And also in my own life, the best things that ever happened to me, they're not planned. They just sort of happen randomly at the last minute. So the way that Ducks Noob Report ended up becoming a commercial audiobook as well was that Red Sale, who works at the RNIB, he has a book program as well. He went to the Booker Prize ceremony, and he met Lucy Ellman there and mentioned that, it was being recorded by the RNIB. And she was interested because her mother-in-law is blind. And so because of that, it was arranged for her to come down to the studios. That doesn't happen that often. Well, it never happened to me before that the author of the book will come down and be interested in seeing what's going on. But because we met and because she heard as it was happening, the recording, then she was interested enough to propose it to Gally Beggar. Yeah. So if I hadn't met Lucy, I don't know if that would have happened. And that was just a complete fluke. You can't possibly plan for such a thing. So you can prepare for the future, of course. You can write to people and try to get them interested in you as a performer. But in the end, things do often just fall into your lap. But then when they do, it's helpful if you're prepared to do the things. Yeah.
So I guess it's just the best tack is to be prepared and open to new opportunities.
Yes. I think I say perhaps, maybe definitely, yes, I should be more into sort of networking and social media to put myself out there. But I'm of that age that it's not as natural to me as it would be to someone who was 25. But I think I should work on that. But then again, though, I don't know. Especially in my life, I think that things just sort of randomly happen and then work out quite well.
Would you consider, we've talked about your audiobooks, your theater work and singing, and I'm just wondering whether you'd be interested or whether, you're open to opportunities to do, television or films, or whether you're more interested in the theater and audiobooks?
I think every actor would say, yes, of course, they're interested in that. They're interested in all of these things. It's just when opportunity arises, I guess. For women, and this is true even of very famous actresses, once you get over the age of 40, there are less parts. It's like still one of the great dramas in a woman's life is, will she or not? And if so, with whom? Will she people the future, have children? And so, of course, theater, film, etc., they're dramatic. And so they're looking for dramatic situations. So often these dramatic situations happen to women between the age of 18 and 40, right? Now, it's changing because there definitely are many more women whose writing and production skills are getting more attention. But it still seems as though a lot more women than men go into acting, go into that profession. But then it's exactly the opposite about how many parts there are. There's many, many more parts for men, but a smaller pool of male actors. So I would say it's much harder to get work as an actress than it is to get work as an actor, especially over a certain age, unfortunately. So you have to become used to, yes, of course you would like these things, but you won't necessarily get them. And one of the beauties about audiobooks is, again, what age are you? Because your voice doesn't necessarily sound exactly like the age you are. Like, apparently there's some very well-known actors who their speciality is doing kids' voices or like young adults. That's just the kind of voice they have. But I did take this one workshop in how to do voiceovers, and the teacher was telling about a friend of his who got the most amazing amount of work playing like teenagers, but actually he was 40 and he was very successful. But then big industry dues would come up and he wouldn't go to them because he didn't want anyone to see that he wasn't actually the age his voice sounded like, because he felt, and I think he's probably right, is that once people know that you're not the age that your voice indicates that you are, you'll probably get less work. So that's one of the advantages about audio work, is you're judged.
And I guess one of the challenges, the opposite to that, is when people can see you, the disadvantage is, they can see your age.
Yeah. But again, though, one thing I think is interesting is now it's much more possible, right, because of the internet, to find out the real age of people. I reckon because there's always been this phenomenon that so many parts are for women of, typical childbearing age. And people have this idea about what does a 40-year-old woman look like? What does a 50-year-old woman look like? And on up. But a lot of those theories are based, like famous actresses from the 1930s, right? And, oh, didn't she look wonderful for 40? But actually, she was probably 50, but no one would ever know because it was much easier to hide biographical data in those days. It was much harder to actually check up on things, whereas now everything's online, databases are online, you can check censuses. You can find out how old people are pretty easily now. But then, so if an actress was going to lie and say she was 20 when actually she was 35, and then keep that up, people, they wouldn't know. So a lot of what we think a 40-year-old woman looks like might be from famous 55-year-olds 50 years ago, right? When it couldn't be checked on. Anytime there's a stigma about something, a lot of lying goes on.
I agree.
Yeah. So the popular conception of thing is always skewed towards that.
So true. So true. Well, thank you, Stephanie. It's been really interesting talking to you about your career and what you've been working on. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Those were some really interesting questions. Yeah, it really made me think about this crazy world of acting, which is very challenging. Yes, like it's one of those careers where the possibility for rejection is in every single step. Like, will you get an audition or not? And then if you do get the audition, will you get the part or not? And then if you do get the part, will the director like what you're doing and the other actors like what you're doing or not? And then eventually, will the critics like it or not? So luckily, I don't think most jobs involve that much rejection, or if they do, you're not made aware of it at every step. So I do think it's one reason that a lot of actors seem quite crazy to people that aren't actors.
It's probably in some ways to use your word, a crazy industry to some degree, and I guess it's an industry where you have to deal with that level of rejection as well. So I guess a lot of actors would have to have that coping mechanism of trying to navigate through all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Stephanie. It's been really interesting speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Artist Tales. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Further information about the artist I spoke with is in the episode notes. Please rate and review this podcast on the apps and spread the word. You can get in touch by emailing artisttalespodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is on social media. Check the information in the episode notes. Hope you join me next episode